Hey everyone, this is ADWCTA Adwukta, and this is the first part of the final analysis of the arena meta for the Grand Tournament expansion. I should say preview. We'll probably analyze it again after it actually comes out and we play a lot. But Blizzard dropped a lot of cards on us on Friday, and it took us a couple days to kind of analyze and figure out where this means every card is heading. So before you have all the cards, even if you have more than half the cards, you don't really know when it comes to the arena where the direction of the meta is heading. Because when you're talking about ranked, there could be like one card that changes the meta. And that's not going to happen in the arena. Well, kind of. Actually, it kind of did happen. But more importantly, it's the consistency. So the number of each type of drops that come out, the number of fast cards, slow cards, the number of Inspire mechanic cards, the number of mechs, the number of beasts, all that stuff affects the arena meta greatly. If you can have consistency in drafting, then you'll see a lot of these decks going on into the higher ranks, into the 10 win range, 11 win range, 12 win range. If you don't have the consistency, you'll see it much less often, and then you'll have to play around everything a lot less. So it all kind of snowballs in all directions with the arena. And now that we have all the cards, a pretty good idea, I think, of where the arena meta is heading. So that's a good thing, and we are not going to talk about the Warrior because I'm still mad as hell about that, and that happened on Friday, and I think a big reason why I couldn't record on Friday night and that I have to record now is that I didn't trust myself to not go on a long rant. Look, I'm already starting to get on there, so we're not going to talk about the arena at all. We're not going to talk about the Warrior at all. We're going to talk about the arena. The Warrior will be in a later part. Just to control myself. So let's start with the most important thing, like by far the most important thing that's going to happen to the arena meta now that we know all the cards. And it is the big one, not the two little ones. That's another point I'm making right now, but the huge one. We have not seen a 5/6 for 5, and I've been asking for it for a while now, and I think a lot of arena players have. Because if you remember, Arena started in Classic without a 3/4 on turn 3 and without a 5/6 on turn 5. It centered around the Yeti on 4 at 4/5. And with crappy 3s and crappy 5s, what it generally did is it made the Yeti and all 4 drops really super powerful. And it marginalized 3 drops and 5 drops so that you had 2 and then 4 and then 6, and that's how you played. And there was this very nice rhythm, and if you knew the rhythm, you were at a huge advantage to someone who didn't know this rhythm, either in drafting or playing or planning out your turns. Then GVG came out, and it created a 3/4, which is a mech warper. And that changed, along with other cards, of course, but that changed the meta by pushing it forward a little bit. So now instead of being centered on 4, the current meta is centered on like 3.5. Because now there's a spider tank and now there's a Yeti. And this effect created a faster meta. Now we're swinging the pendulum back, right? We're taking a pit fighter because now a pit fighter can eat a Yeti. And then a pit fighter itself can be eaten by a Boulder Fist Ogre while the Yeti eats a spider tank and the spider tank eats a croc. And we're all done all throughout 6. So, of course, no one plays 1/2s, so the 2-drop doesn't really eat anything. But all from 2 to 6, the entire chain is now complete. You're not going to see this card all that often, as in, I think on average you'll be offered this card like half the time you draft an arena. But every single player has access to it, so it's not like a class drop or anything. What makes this card really important, though, is not just the card in the vacuum, but there's also a Clockwork Knight, and there's also a Kvaldir Raider. Kvaldir Raider, questionable 5-drop, right? It's like a floating watcher for basically any class. And with floating watcher, you don't usually drop it on 5, but it's the idea that you can drop it on 5, right? And tap the next turn. And with the Clockwork Knight, it's a 5-mana 5/5, which are great, right? In the current meta. One more thing to add to this is that 5/5s are great in the current meta. Now that you have a pit fighter, are 5/5s still going to be great? Well, it's not going to be as great because it's not just the pit fighter. You're going to have a couple of other cards that have 5 attack, and a couple of other even bigger cards that will kill a Yeti regardless. And if it kills a Yeti, it'll also kill a Clockwork Knight. And those bigger cards have more health generally, so it'll actually survive. So 5s for 5/5s are probably 5/5s for 5 mana is a card stat distribution that's probably going to get a little worse. But on the other hand, I don't feel comfortable enough to make that prediction because with the arrival of this Pit Fighter, the whole consistency of fives and Clockwork Knight, the consistency of fives in the common pool have gotten drastically stronger. What was the best five before this? Silverhand Knight. That's not a big card. That's a card that has a lot of stats, but it'll never eat anything. Well, it'll eat a 3-drop, right, with the 4/4, but generally not, right? It gets eaten by a 4-drop. It trades evenly with a Yeti. You also have, what's the other good? You have a Tiger, but that's just one card. You know, that fits the Clockwork Knight kind of model. And then you have, what's the next good 5-drop? Like a Fen Creeper. That's a weird card, right? It only has 3 attack. It's meant to stop small cards. It's not meant to compete with big cards. And then you go down to like Frostwolf Warlord. Again, you need a lot of stuff. It's hard to play it on turn 5. You don't really have any consistency at all. And by adding Clockwork Knight and Pit Fighter, you have more than doubled the consistency of 5-drops. Because Pit Fighter is going to come, I'll tell you right now, Pit Fighter is going to come in at above a 70. Because it's that good of a card in the ratings. Clockwork Knight is going to come in at somewhere in the 60s, I think. So all of a sudden, you've doubled the amount of great fives that you have access to. And there's Spectral Knight also, which is a 4/6, and again trades evenly with a Yeti. So, okay, you haven't quite doubled it, but you're getting close, right? With this one expansion, which doesn't change a whole lot of things, you've almost doubled your 5-drop consistency in the arena. That's pretty crazy. That's just this huge change in the meta, and you're going to feel it immediately. And this is one of the first causes to slowing the meta down, because once you have 5-drops that are so good, people are going to pick these 5-drops, and therefore they're going to have bigger decks. And when you pick an extra 5-drop, that's going to come at the cost of something, right? So that's going to come at the cost of a utility card. It's not going to come at the cost of a removal. No one's going to do that. But it's going to come at the cost of, and it's not going to come at the cost of your curve, right? No one's going to ditch curve for something like even as good as a Pit Fighter. But it does mean you're going to have less utility cards, and you're going to have less opportunity. Utility cards being like secrets, like, 1 mana tempo kind of cards. But it's going to come at the cost of those, and maybe 1-drops, and maybe those additional 2-drops and 3-drops that GVG meta had you stocking up on. So this is such a huge shift in the arena meta, and that's where I wanted to start, because nothing else I say from here on out is going to be anywhere near as important as this point. And it's not just the Pit Fighter, it's the Pit Fighter and the Clockwork Knight. 2 very good 5-drops. And this is, if Mech Warper made a statement, which is that we have mechs now, they are good, and the whole meta is moving a little faster. Pit Fighter's making the opposite statement. We have 5s now, 5s are good, and we're moving the meta right back, probably to where it was at Nex. The absolute fastest I think the meta can go after this is where it was at Classic, which is not fast at all, right? That was the trade on board all the time meta. But even in that meta, there were tempo players doing very, very well, because you can always, get ahead of the game. So I like this change. I think there was that artificial, like Blizzard was kind of scared when releasing Hearthstone. So they had a gap in 3 and they had a gap in 5. It was less good game design as it was cautious game design, because it allowed them to control exactly where everything goes. And they're slowly releasing the controls as they get more comfortable with how the meta is progressing. And this is it's a very good thing. And also, you get to see it less often with more cards, right? So it's less scary to release a card like this than it was, like, let's say, in Nax or in Classic. So that's the 5-drops, the big change, right? Next, I'm going to talk about 3-drops. I already talked about Mech Warper, right? So we have 3-drops. 3-drops are in. GVG made Mech Warper, which is a very good 3-drop, and we have 3-drops became a thing in GVG, whereas it wasn't before. Like a Raptor in Nax was pretty much just as good as most 3-drops you can put out, except like the 2 or 3 premium 3-drops. Now a Raptor on turn 3, not really going to get the job done. Well, this trend is actually going to continue, because what's happening in the Grand Tournament is all this crap. And I mean crap, not in a sense that it sucks, but I mean, like, look at how much stuff there is. By the way, there's no rare 5s being released, but in the arena, the common pool is where it's at. So the effect on the 5s is really going to matter to the arena. But for 3s, between commons and rares, you have so many cards. Just so many cards. And they're not great, right? Like, we talked about the Archer Horse Rider, how I'm not as high on it as most people are. It's more of a utility card. It's going to be like, maybe a little better than a Wolf Rider. But again, Wolf Rider's not that great. Wolf Rider is around the same as like a River Croc, right? It's a playable arena card. You're not going to draft it and be like, oh no, there goes the deck. But you're also not going to be like, oh my god, an Argent Horse Rider. This is not the Pit Lord, Pit Fighter. Dragonhawk Rider. It's a 3-mana 3/3. Those aren't that good. Those are getting worse, right? Like as the meta slows down, because again, we're talking about the Raptor, right? 3-mana 3/2s were pretty good. Well, 3-mana 3/3s were totally okay back then. Now 3-mana 3/3 is not so good. But I do like the Inspire effect, right? Which is Wind Fury. And I'll talk about Inspire cards later. But it's one of those things where you put it on the board, and if it survives a turn, you can clean up some little stuff, and especially if you're Priest. And what does that do? Stops aggro. Ice Rager, 5/2. Worse than a Magma Rager. Yeah, I can kill a Yeti, but it has more than half a chance of just dying to your opponent's 2-drop, straight up. And that's kind of the downside of a 3/3 and a 4/5. And that's like 100% of an Ice Rager. Because if you drop a 3/3 and your opponent has a 2/3, you can eat it. If you drop a 2/4, your opponent has a 3/2, you can eat it, but otherwise it trades evenly. And those cards aren't that good for that reason. Ice Rager, on turn 3, not very good. But after turn 3, later on in the game, for 3 mana, it's the best value you can get at the 3-drop slot. So overall, not that good. But still, it's a card, and it's not awful. Silent Knight, we've already won over, incredible. Coliseum Manager, 2/5. Druid of the Flame is a 2/5. Everyone loves that card. Sure, you can't put it out as a 5/2, and so it's not that good. But it's also not going to be below average. Fencing Coach, new card. You can bank a hero power basically, which is more combo-y than anything, but just in terms of how it's played, it's more playable than an Ironforge Rifleman in a lot of the top classes, and it causes all these combo stuff. So again, not that good, but definitely more consistency. And Light's Champion is a 3-mana 4/3. Out of all these cards put together, it creates more consistency in the draft for the 3-mana slot, because this is by far, like, compared to the amount of 2-drops that are released, this is more than double the amount of 2-drops they're releasing in TGT for neutrals. More than double. I'm going to say that again. More than double. That's an insane ratio. That's someone sitting there and being like, all right, I think we need more 3-drops. And in the arena, what adding more than double means is it dilutes all the other mana cost cards, and so you get offered these 3-drops more often. Sure, they're not great, but when you're stumbling a little in your draft, you're going to stumble into these 3-drops. And when you get these 3-drops, you're not going to have a problem anymore. 3-drops are, statistically speaking, the most difficult drop to fill. 2-drops have a lot of 2-drops, and they're all kind of the same, so they're very easy to fill. 3-drops have several premium 3-drops, and then a whole bunch of very subpar cards. And you're not even guaranteed to get those subpar cards. That later on in the draft, you get like a 2/3 or 3/3 for 3 mana, and you're like, all right, totally fine. Why? Because you're always running short on 3-drops. Statistically speaking, just in terms of like your odds of drawing into the 3-drop, if you mulligan aggressively for 2s, you're going first. You need more than 4 3-drops to get. You actually need about 5 3-drops, almost 5 3-drops. It's more than 4.5 3-drops to get the consistency of being able to curve out on turn 3. No one has 5 3-drops in their deck. Nobody. That's not a thing that people do. And so that's going to be a problem right now. And it's not going to be a problem once TGT comes out. All right, I talked enough about 3-drops. You may have noticed that I've left a 3-drop out of here, just one. And it's the Saboteur. And I've left him out because he is my favorite card by far. Yeah, people have asked me a couple times what my favorite card is revealed so far in the Grand Tournament. I wasn't too impressed with anything. Probably the Kraken. But the Saboteur now is definitely by far the favorite card. Why? Because it screws with your opponent. Any card that screws with your opponent is infinitely better when played by a good player than a bad player. Why? Because you need to make a prediction of what your opponent wants to do, what your opponent needs to do. And this card is not so ridiculous that you have to make these wild predictions that you need ridiculous reads for. It's a pretty easy read, right? Like, you freeze your opponent's hero power, but it causes you to be able to set up your current turn on the board state, especially against classes with pings. And even better, it's better against opponents with better hero powers. And hero powers play such a big role in the arena, and it's going to play an even bigger role with TGT, that it's really good to see these cards come out that kind of turns the tables on an opponent's good hero power. Oh, you're expecting to use your hero power? In all classes, always have this expectation that no matter what happens, I can always use my hero power, right? Like I could ping something to clean it up or whatever. Like I'm safe. You're not safe anymore. With this card in the meta, you are not safe anymore, and it's a 3 mana 4/3, so it's not even a bad card just to like drop on turn 3. You're going to see it. It's a pickable card. It's like an Imp Master probably in value. You're going to see it, and it's going to screw people over. So I really like this card, and Blizzard has a philosophy of not allowing you to screw with your opponents. Typically, that's why the Priest original design had a lot of discard cards. It was like Black and Magic the Gathering, like a mix of white and black, I guess. But then they took all those cards away and changed it all to make it more like minion focused and healing focused. Why? Because they decided it was not fun to like make your opponents discard cards, like for your opponent. I don't really care if my opponents are having fun or not. I like this card, and I don't have less fun if my opponent screws with me with this card. I would say like well played, right? Like that's a good card. I like the design on that one a lot. Okay. Give me a second while I get rid of all this stuff. It's the problem when I can't edit my videos. Got to do it all live. The next point, and this is like kind of a follow-up to the previous 2 points about what's happening. So you have a consistent 3-drop meta now, and you have a new 5-drop meta that's going to swoop in and reduce the power of 4s and reduce the power of 3s and shift everything back a little to create the center at like somewhere between like 3, 4, 5 rather than just between 3 and 4. What's going to happen now is that the meta is going to slow down. And one more reason it slows down, if you want more evidence for this, is that of the good, like of the elite drops that are being released, right? You have 2 2-drops, and I'll let you figure out which these are. If you've been watching these videos, you know which ones they are. You have 2 common 2-drops, 1 common 3-drop, 2 common 4-drops, and 2 common 5-drops, right? These are the cards that are going to be rated 60 or above in all classes. 2, 1, 2, 2, with no 1-drops, by the way, no elite 1-drops. So in a normal deck, you want something like 5 to 6 2-drops. You want something like 4 to 5 3-drops. You want something like 4 to 5 4-drops, and you don't really care how many 5-drops you want, maybe like 2 or 3, I don't know. So the current status quo is skewed very heavily towards 2-drops, right? Your curve looks something like this normally in the arena. For like an average neutral class. For like a paladin or mage, it'll look like this. But that means in order to keep the same consistency the arena had before, you need more 2s than 3s, more 3s than 4s, more 4s than 5s. And you don't have that. You have this very flat kind of line with no 1s. So you're getting rid of the aggro side, and you're making the consistency go towards the more control side. And on top of all that, you get this guy, and you get this guy. And that's ridiculous. I don't know if anyone's talking about this yet, but these are ridiculous cards. Not because they're like the best cards ever, although North Sea Kraken, I don't know what to say. North Sea, I'm going to say Kraken. It's going to be Kraken from now on. North Sea Kraken is a ridiculous card. I wanted to put it above a 90. Merps fought me on it hardcore, and so now it's like really high in the 80s, but it's definitely the best common card. The best common card is the North Sea Kraken. And then the Capture Jormonger is also not a bad card. It is 7 mana, which is a lot of mana, and the stat distribution is kind of like missing one stat, but the 5/9 stat distribution is just about the perfect stat distribution you can find for that card. Because you will kill all the 5/5s. You will kill all the 4 mana cards. You will kill, well, not the new ones, but you'll kill all the existing 4 mana cards. And you will just clean up on the board. As you get higher in the mana, your attack matters less and less if you're just interested in board trading. And the slower the meta gets, the more board trading happens, right? So that's just such an excellent stat distribution. You're going to see this rated pretty highly, maybe surprisingly highly. But for a common card, you have another fairly elite card. Not like North Sea Kraken, but also another elite card. And to understand why this is so exciting for the arena, the cards that are above 6 mana right now, that are good is a Stormer Champion, which was in Classic, and then they added a Force Tank Max. That's it. That's how many cards did we have before this, right? Like we had maybe like 600 cards. I don't know. We had a whole lot of cards with 2 common cards that are really high mana, and one was in Classic, and one was added in GVG. None were added after. Now all of a sudden you get 2 in one expansion, and the North Sea Kraken being the best card, the best common card in the entire game. That's a crazy jump in consistency. We're talking about what the consistency curve is, right? How many 7 drops or more are you expected to have right now? 0? 0.5? Probably like 0.5, maybe even a little less than 0.5. How many are you going to be expected to have after the Grand Tournament comes out? Well, you're more than doubling it, because these are great cards. You're going to be expected to have 1 or 2. And in order to play these cards, because once you get these cards in your deck, right, you're like, oh my god, I see a North Sea Kraken, I need to pick it. Once you pick it, your whole deck changes. You need to get to turn 9. It doesn't do anything before turn 9. So you're shifting your focus first to 5 drops because they're good, then to 7 and 9 mana cards because those cards are good. Such a slowdown of the meta. The effects are going to be, like, you hear all these effects I'm talking about. They all stack. The 3 drops are not great, but then they... and one more thing. The 3 drops that are not great and the new 2 drops and all that stuff, all the new cards that are being added with these abilities, the 2 drops with abilities, the 3 drops with abilities, they're also kind of really better played after the turn 2 and turn 3. So if you're picking those cards, and you are, because that's what's going to be offered to you, you're going to get more value out of them if the game drags on. So then everyone's going to be trying to get this value, and so the whole thing is going to slow down. This is going to be such a pronounced effect. It's like when GVG came out, and all of a sudden everyone's like, what the heck happened? Everyone's going face and winning. This is going to happen now, and you're going to be like, what the heck is happening? Each game is half an hour now, and, we're drawing our entire decks. Maybe not that bad, but you're going to be drawing way more cards than you were before. Which also makes other slow cards better, right? Like card draw cards and all the other stuff. You're not going to see any of these change in the tier list just yet, because these are all like kind of like predictions. But we'll adjust to it fairly quickly once they come out. Okay, one more card that's going to slow down the meta. I probably should have put it with these graphics. Anyway, it's the Refreshment Vendor, and the Refreshment Vendor restores 4 health to each hero as a battle cry. It's a mirror effect, so both sides get more health, which generally means it slows down the game by 4 health. And it's a 3/5, so it's playable. Not much to say about it, but it's another playable card that slows down the meta. And we're going to go talk about Inspire cards now. Inspire, if you want the whole rundown on Inspire, you should watch the very first video in this series, because that's where we do the whole rundown. And it slows down the meta. But what I want to talk about here with Inspire, now that we know all the Inspire cards, besides just going over a couple of the Inspire cards that we see now, is as a tribe. Like, we added mechs in GVG. What did we add? What kind of tribe did we add in the Grand Tournament? Well, it's Inspire. Each individual card, when people are valuing cards, they look at, oh, what if I put the card down and use a hero power? How much of a bonus do I get? How good is that? But the real bonus, of course, is when you put 2 Inspire cards down, when you put 3 Inspire cards down, and then you use your hero power. Because then you have to use your hero power, because then the hero power, with the onboard effect, is already bigger than the 2 mana is worth, much less the fact that it's a free card, much less you actually get the effect of the hero power. So this is a really, really powerful tribe, much more powerful than the mech. And the consistency is not as good as the mechs, but it's actually, for the arena, it's actually better. And I'll tell you why it's better for the arena. When it comes to the consistency, you're going to see much more Inspire shenanigans and crap going on than you ever saw mechs. Because there were ever only 2 real cards that buffed mechs. You had a Mech Warper, you had a Tinkertown Technician. And neither card were amazing cards, right? They were all like okay-ish, but there's only 2. That means you need a bunch of mechs to set up, and then you need these 2 cards to come in, or like Mech Warper to come before, and Tinkertown to come after, to kind of buff your mechs. Without that, the mechs meant nothing. And so the consistency was split into 2 sides, and they were centered on 2 cards that were neutrals, that were okay-ish, and so you're going to see, at like on average, less than 1 of those per deck. On the other hand, each Inspire card, or card with an Inspire or Hero Power effect, stacks with the next one. They're all the same. They're all equal. You don't have to like put something out and then put the other one. You don't have to like rely on getting 2 cards magically in order to do anything. You don't have to run these highly synergistic decks that are more for the constructed than the arena meta. Whenever you put these cards that you're drafting anyway, not that they're great cards, you're going to fill your deck out with average-ish cards, right? When you're going to put a lot of them out, they're just going to be your normal minions, and you're going to be incentivized to use your hero power. So everything's going to change. And there are enough cards. There are enough Inspire cards, and the consistency is high enough that you will see this very frequently, like probably every single game, that someone pulls off a double Inspire. Whereas, how often do you see people pull out a Mech Warper or like a Tinkertown to great effect in the arena? Right? Like maybe 1 out of every 3-4 games. And this is all because every Inspire card inspires with it. It synergizes with every other Inspire card. So the new ones that were added, Bone Guard Lieutenant, better than your normal 2-drop, right? If you happen to use your hero power, you get a 3/3, and then you get a 3/4, etc. The bad part is gaining health on a 3/2 is really not that important when you can use your hero power. So like starting the mid-game, late game, when you really want to be using your hero power, it gets around things like Consecrate and Holy Nova, right? Like Cleave. That happens. But other than that, what you're most likely going to be doing with something with just 3 damage and 2 health, or 3 health, or 4 health. This is why Spider Tech is not that good in the late game, right? Is you're going to be throwing it in just for the damage. So I'm not too impressed by it, but obviously it's a 2-drop for 3/2, so it has a very high starting value, and then the Inspire mechanic is only going to make it go higher. Dragonhawk Rider, we already talked about it. I like the fact that it's going to make 1 Wind Fury minion actually viable. This is a viable arena card. It's not good. You take a normal 2-drop over it by far, but you're going to see it, and it's probably going to be our highest rated Wind Fury card besides Raging Worgen, which you can't control whether Wind Furies or not. Fencing Coach. Talked about this. Not much more to say. It's kind of more for combo-y shenanigans, which means it's going to be less good for the arena. But even a card like Fencing Coach, right? Like, you can stock up your hero power and then trigger it on a whole bunch of Inspires on one turn. Even this is going to be used in the arena to a certain effect. And even this synergizes with all the Inspire cards. And Recruiter. So these are just the new ones, right? The better Inspire cards I've already reviewed. Recruiter, 5 mana, 5/4, not that good. Inspire, add a 2/2 Squire to your hand. This 2/2 Squire is only 1 mana. That's been confirmed. It's the same Squire that you get from Silverhand Knight. So what it really reads is 3 mana that you can split up, put out a 2/2, and then ping your opponent's face, or do whatever your hero power does for free. And that's like an Ironforge Rifleman kind of value, right? Like absolutely for free. So that's pretty good. But it's one of those things where you kind of really need to use this hero power. It's a good hero power. So you need to play this card very late. One last one. There's one more Inspire card, and this is only in the neutrals. I'll go over classes separately. The Anti, it's an epic, no one's going to see it, but I do like that there's more cards like the Coliseum Manager where using your hero power is actually bad. Or like having a good hero power is actually bad. Just to get a little balance to sorry, I'm not going to talk about Warrior. Just to get a little balance to the bad hero power classes with this whole hero power inspired mechanic that comes out. You copy your opponent's hero power. This is generally not even a positive for most classes because you've kind of built your deck assuming your hero power, not assuming you're going to take someone else's hero power. And you don't get a choice. It's not like, choose which hero power you want, yours or your opponent's. You just have to copy it, and it sacrifices stats for it. So it's not going to be a good card. But I do like that they're throwing this in. Okay. So now we're going to get to what people have been kind of raging about. I'm probably raging a little less than other people about this, but it's the fact that we have quote-unquote power creep. False. We don't actually have power creep. Power creep is when you take playable cards and then you make them better. This is taking 2 cards that no one ever plays, 2 cards that are basically unplayable, and making better versions of them to make them playable. This is just laziness. Blizzard could have just buffed those cards and, made these new cards something else, or not made these cards. But, they get a higher number to say, oh, we released 132 cards or whatever instead of 130 cards. And we do get more artwork, I guess. And in the arena, of course, it actually matters because it changes the consistency. But it doesn't matter in a good way because you don't want to ever pick cards that are that bad, right? Like, you want to get rid of the variance in the arena by making people pick different cards that are all vaguely similar in goodness. You don't want anyone to be stuck with a Magma Rager. So how good is an Evo Heckler? It's a 5/4, which is not a good stat distribution, but but it's not awful either, right? It's like a 54 is our Lost Hall Strider. And this one has a taunt, which makes it a lot better. But it's still not going to be an elite card. It's going to be a very good card. You're going to see Evo Hecklers like running around now. But just, I think we should all calm down a little about the death of the Booty Bay Bodyguard and the death of the Magma Rager. They were never played. These cards are going to be played, but they're not like upsetting the meta or anything like that. So if anything, be like, come on, Blizzard, who's not going to see through this, right? You're just being lazy. You should have made these cards something else. But in terms of balance, it's not a big concern. And with that, we're going to wrap this up with a very quick going through of a couple of the remaining cards that were revealed on Friday. And these are just cards I couldn't fit into anything. They're not good either. Like, here's the 1-drop, right? It's the 2/1. Every other 1-drop was a 1/2. This is a 2/1, and it is pretty good. A 2/1 is usually like 34, 36. I forget what we rated the Murloc Raider now. And it has a taunt, which for a small card is very good. But it's a taunt that can be pinged, which kind of gets rid of its purpose for like half your matchups. So I don't know, but it's not going to be great. Especially in this meta, right? Like, we talked about how we're not going to change, like, let's say 5/5s to move them down a little. And we're not going to change 1-drops to move them all down, even if that's where the meta's going. Well, we'll see how it stabilizes. Right now, we still have 1-drops, like, I think a little lower rated than they should be. So maybe this will kind of come our way, and then we won't have to change anything at all. Frigid Snowbolt. 2 6s are now a thing on 4. The Oasis Snapjaw is a 2/7. It's not that good of a card. A 2/6 is going to be worse. The spell damage is not going to make up for it. It is one more card that's fitting that category. So it's one more card that's something like a pit fighter can't kill outright. So there's that. And with the spell damage, right, higher health is better because you want it to stay on the board for one more turn, right? You don't want your opponents to be incentivized to kill it. If it's something like a Kobold, your opponent's going to kill it. It's not going to live a turn. With the Frigid Snowballs, your opponent may take the risk and go face, right? Or they may just not have enough attack on the board. They may have a Yeti on the board, which is a great 4-drop, but it's not going to kill this thing. So you can kind of set up the next turn for your, like, Holy Nova, right? Or for your off-curve Consecrate or whatever. So you can't do that with it. So that's one of the reasons why, like, Archmage, which is a 5/7, horrible stats for a 6-drop, 7-drop. I don't even know. It's just such a bad card. But it's actually not that bad because it stays around, right? This Frigid Snowbolt has the similar effect, but still, 2/6 is just too few stats. It's not going to be that great. Twilight Guardian is the other 2/6. It's epic. You're not going to see it a lot. It has that dragon synergy. And it's not a card, like we said, right? You're not going to want to play a 2/6, generally. So you can hold on to it and get the value when you put it out. It's like a Blackwing Corruptor. You're going to have most likely a dragon in your deck, right? So you're going to hold on to this as much as possible until you get that 3/6 for 4 mana taunt value. But by that point, the mana doesn't really matter that much, right? And whereas a Blackwing Corruptor is a mini fire elemental, this is like a 1 mana cheaper Fen Creeper. Like, it's just not that exciting. And then finally, Mogor's Champion. There's a card called a Corehound. I don't know if you guys know about it. You may not, because no one ever picks it. You may see it being offered and laugh at it. We laugh at it. It's a crappy card. And it's a 9/5 for 7 mana. So they took away 1 attack, and they took away 1 mana, which makes it about right in terms of the mana valuation, right? Like, you have a Salty Dog at a 7/4 for 5 mana. but then they had to give it a downside. And it's such a huge downside, right? You think an Ogre Brute has a bad downside with 50% chance to attack the wrong enemy. Well, when something has a attack defense split where it'll die to most things you want to hit because it has way more attack than defense, you really want to be able to aim that damage. You want to be able to go face with it. You want to be able to take out that like Ironbark. I don't know. You want to do things with it. That's why you put the card down, and you're not going to be able to. It'll hit into like the Croc, right? Or it'll hit into like the 5/5 that'll trade up with it, or like the Lost Tall Strider. Who knows? It's such a bad card. But you know, I guess it'll cause some good moments in the arena. So you have that going for it. And that is our full review of all the neutral cards and kind of an overview of the whole meta and where it's headed. I think this is going to be the most informative of the videos we're going to release. We're going to follow this up with class previews. So we're going to go down class by class because that's how you do the arena, right? You don't go like card by card. You should be going class by class and themes by themes in terms of what's going to change. You can never look at a card in isolation. And it's one of our founding philosophies of Hearth Arena, right? All cards are connected to your deck, to other cards. And anytime a drop in the bucket happens in the arena, everything shifts on a string. So we're going to go over class by class. And the first classes that we're going to do, we're going to look at the top classes. We're going to start with Mage, Paladin, Rogue. We're going to see how the meta is going to affect those classes and where they're going to be headed. And some things may be surprising, depends on how much or how deeply you've been thinking about it. But we have some predictions for some of these classes, and they may not all be exactly where other people have been saying. So tune in, and if you like this video, if you like the series, hit the like button on YouTube. Hit the follow button if you haven't already, or like the subscribe button if you haven't already. That way we get onto your feeds better, and it really helps our numbers, which helps all the other stuff to happen. And of course, share us. Send the link to your friends. It's the arena, right? It's not competitive. You're not going to need the competitive edge against your friend. You want everybody to improve. And that's it for us. I will see you in the next video about Mage, Rogue, and Druid. This is ADWCTA. Have a good day.